And so just once again, thank you guys for having me do a presentation again for you. I know Patty back there is one of my biggest, cheerleaders and really loves having me do these things. So I do appreciate it. So tonight we're going to be discussing essentially just a quick glimpse on, when we start planning breedings and certain things that we want to consider when we're doing these breedings and kind of how to navigate some of that. I have, a unique way, I think, of looking at breedings when I do my pairings. Needless to say, though, I am always learning. I'm still trying to, perfect the trade. I know there's probably folks that are, I think, sitting at that table. I know Mimi for sure has got a breadth of experience and tons of nuances, I'm sure, that she throws into what she does, that I'm still picking up on. But I'm hoping that you guys will get some valuable information out of this and maybe look at things a little differently than maybe you have in the past. And so I know you guys have already heard about my experience in my past, so I don't need to hash that out again, other than, I've been in this breed for probably the last, I want to say 17 years now, and it's the love of my life, and I like being involved in all the different ways. So to get started, I guess I want to, similar to like I did last time, I like opening up with a question, right? So my question to the crowd, and feel free to provide your feedback, but why is planning your breeding and your selection of your pairing so important? I would love to have any feedback on that. Why is it so important in your to make your selections wisely and make sure that you're doing what you need to create that pairing? Like I said, I got everyone on mute, so I'm gonna ask to unmute the crowd. Jose, if you can help me on that one. Mimi's probably got awesome responses.
Health and whatever. So I line breed.
Uh-huh.
Because I know what I'm going to get.
Right. So why is that selection so important, though? Just in general, like, why is it so important to be selective about what it is that you're producing?
Because you want to produce a better dog than what you've got.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Right. We're all trying to do better. We're all looking at what we have and trying to decide, okay, what out of all of the dogs out there are going to help me improve upon what I have, or basically get as close to that standard as possible, right? Like that's why it's important. So Mimi, if you had anything else you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I do. Yep. I got my first Doberman in 85, and then my bitch in 84 and 85. And at that point, George Rude and lucky me, Peggy Adamson and Frank Grover were mentors. And we were looking at something called the bracket breeding. And that was the sire of the sire was the grandsire of the dam, which basically meant that you were doing a line breeding off of dogs that had been successful at producing and successful in show.
Yeah.
So what I was starting with a bitch that was bred out of Sherlock's Castle Rock, whose mother was Moraga Hills High Fashion, and the sire was Irene Bivens' dog. So basically we had two dogs. Murray Hills High Fashion was a top producing bitch at the time. She produced 21 champions. And Irene's dog was a multiple champion producer. Forgive me, I'm having a senior moment, I can't remember. And then the dam was out of an Artol bitch, bred to Barong the Warlock's son. So it was like, ugh. I mean, my first dog and my bitch were like amazingly well bred. It was a complete fall into luck.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but the basic thing was you wanted to breed a successful dog to a successful bitch. So the bracket breeding is a concept that the sire of the sire is the grandsire of the dam. So it's what's known as a line breeding.
Mhm.
And we just went on from there. I only bred 7 litters, but I stayed within that Artall Doberman
Mhm.
Sherlock thing and was
Yeah.
very lucky. And then I haven't actively bred in years because with work and everything else, I didn't do it. But I also looked when I bought dogs that they were from people that had bred successful dogs to successful dogs along a line breeding.
Mhm.
And people that did health testing, you know, I mean, at that point, when I started, the only thing was do hips.
Right.
You know, there was
Mhm.
nothing
Yeah.
about, there was
Definitely come a long
no
way.
cardio testing
Yep.
or anything else. And then also people would test for whether there were dilutions or not. And I just stayed away from that, although I've seen beautiful fawn dogs and beautiful blue dogs, and I have no prejudice against when I'm judging, but
Mhm.
it felt like stay away from that. And
Right.
then the von Wildebrands thing is a little hinky because I've had dogs that were supposed to be affected and dogs that were clear and dogs that were halfway there. And I've never
Right.
had to deal with any dog that actually had problems when they had surgery. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
decided that that was not as good a criteria as temperament and pedigree because you know you can always I'm breeding clear dogs doesn't mean you get good dogs.
Right. 100%.
All right,
There's tons of
back to you.
no worries. Yeah, so the the objective when you're planning these breedings is to do better, right? Is we want to improve upon what we have or keep in some cases what we already have and trying to do so with the standard in mind, right? Or at least that should be your goal, right? If you're trying to breed into a purebred breed, the goal is the standard, right? That's kind of like that place that we want to always shoot for. So there's going to be a lot of things though that roll into that. And you have your basic stuff, which is going to be, your health, your temperament, conformation, pedigree. We have some other like outlier things like, now we're rolling into genetic health testing and whatnot. So there's definitely those core competencies, right? And I don't want to, I'm not going to dive deeply into those because I think that most of us here in this already understand that the Doberman is a multifaceted breed, right? You have health, you have temperament, you have structure, and then you have that overall like what is our breed, right? So it's very important that we're considering all of those aspects when we're looking at appropriate pairings for our dogs. So if we look a little deeper into maybe health, right? Something that a lot of people I don't think take into consideration is the lifestyle of your breeding dogs and how that plays a role into health. When we're out there shopping for what we want to bring in, we have to look not only at what we already have. So say you have, I'm going to use allergies as a great example here. So say you have a dog that has some minor environmental allergies, right? This is considered a health thing, right? It can potentially cause issues down the road, but maybe if you find a stud that complements the dog that doesn't have any allergies and its grandparents don't have any allergies, these are things that you start looking at. So, think outside the box when it comes to health. You always have your basic level of testing, right? If we can all jump on OFA, we can look at chick and see, okay, yeah, is it BWD? Is it got good hips? Is it had its recent echo and Holter done? Has it had its eyes checked? Are we doing all of these testing? But all of that stuff is only looking at just the dog in front of you. And sometimes though it's not indicative of what's behind the dog. There are certain things though in that health category that could be part of that. Do they get upset stomachs easily? Do they, once again, those allergies, do they get chronic anxiety? Do they, all of those kind of things are many times familial inheritance patterns. And so what that means is you'll see it showing up more and more times in the pedigree or in the direct family. So getting intimate with all those different aspects of health on the dogs that you're actually pursuing or looking into, and then complementing what you have in house. No dog is perfect, right? So this isn't like, oh no, don't ever breed to a dog that may have allergies. Oh no, don't ever breed to a dog with a sensitive stomach. It's saying take it into consideration with what you already have, right? So if it's going to not directly increase negative traits that you already carry, then they get to stay on the radar. If they're going to double up on stuff that you're already struggling with in your pedigree, then maybe you should avoid it. It's just points, right? So there's so many different categories that we're going to have to do this in when you're considering breeding. Another one, if we look into maybe temperament, right? Temperament is always a fun conversation. There's going to be a lot of people that tell you that, oh, I have a classic temperament, or, oh, my dog has a real Doberman temperament. And we have the standard that defines the temperament, but as we all know, black and white words will never fully show you what temperament really is in our breed. And we're all going to have a slight variation of what that ideal temperament really looks like or represents for us. But once again, the goal is the standard, right? So our dogs, Dobermans, were supposed to be personal protection dogs. They're supposed to be able to go out and about in public in all these different places while constantly being observant, alert, and committed to their owners, not chasing the cat across the street, but not like being a deadhead where you're dragging it behind you, right? So there's certain attributes that you want to be looking for when you're looking to bring back into your own pedigree or your own breeding program. So if you have a dog that might be a little flat, maybe its litter mates are flat, maybe mom and dad's a little flat, and you're like, man, I really wish that I can actually go out there and do some crazy obedient stuff and not have to work quite as hard to get there. Let's look at some temperament, right? Let's look at the sire. Let's look at his parents. Let's look at brothers and sisters. What are some common themes in that temperament? Do they often need to have a little bit more, effort to wear them out? Do they need a little bit more effort to keep their minds calm and busy? Are they, glued to your side like a Doberman should be, but maybe your dog likes to go sit out in the yard and not pay attention to anyone, right? So we have to think about these things. Oh, it happens. We have to think about this stuff, and as it applies to not only the dogs themselves that are producing, but what's behind them. And, my general rule of thumb to help me kind of like just clear the space in my head is to look out 3 generations, front and back. And when I say front and back, this is saying, okay, if I look behind the dogs that I'm breeding, back 3 generations, and I can confidently say, I understand what's behind them, and I know what they bring to the table. You need to then think about, with what I have in this pairing, could I potentially use that 3 generations down? You want to cement things. So if it's flippant behind, it's probably going to be flippant in front, right? So you want to cement these qualities that you're striving for, and you want to cement the qualities that you already have that you like. So that's another one of those kind of categories where temperament is very fluid, though. So you want to look for it from the pedigree perspective, look for it in the dogs, but also understand that there's so many environmental factors that can influence temperament that the dog in front of you may not genetically be what you think they are. That's why that pedigree and the familial inheritance patterns are really, really important. So you want to look for common themes across, not just what's in front of you. Some other categories, obviously, conformation, right? I think there is a lot of different ways that you can handle conformation. Me personally, and once again, this is just for me, lots of people do it differently, and neither is wrong or right. But when I look at structure and what I want to bring into my breeding program, I am looking for dogs that consistently produce the closest to standard that I can get. So I don't like extreme, right? So I'm going to, as a rule, find the most standard looking dog I could possibly find. And I'm going to keep using that over and over again until hopefully that potence of nothing but standard dogs gives me consistency in standard dogs. With conformation, though, not all traits are inherited equally. So there's going to be a lot of scenarios where you're going to have one aspect of the dog structure, like a rear, right? The angulation in a rear, that may be easier to pass on to its offspring than maybe the front, that magic layback with a good elbow return that we all strive for in our breed can literally can show up and disappear in almost one generation. Whereas for some reason, those rears can be prolific through multiple generations, and you're like, how, why? So you want to always take these kind of things into consideration. If you always shoot for the ideal as opposed to following the trend, as to, okay, I have a short rear, I want a longer rear, so I'm always going to go to a longer rear dog, then you can start getting those ups and downs where maybe this generation you have what you want, but next generation you don't. So the more consistency you get towards that ideal, the better off you're going to be, that the dog will inherit those qualities that you're actually striving for. So in conformation, I will look for areas that the dog is able to bring in from a structural perspective, from conformation perspective, and say, do the parents have it? Do the grandparents have it? Do the dog's siblings have it? Does the dog produce that, right? That's another big caveat, is if the dog actually produces it. And there's no like set in stone how many generations back you want it. But I generally look 3 out. So I'm trying to look for those consistencies of closer to that standard zone as opposed to a complete polar balancing of what I have, with maybe a slight lean towards what I need. I hope that makes sense. It can get a little complicated, but yeah, so striving always to find a male that is closest to that ideal state with slight strengths in pedigree towards the direction I need my dogs to go, as opposed to going and jumping really extreme in one category or the other, because you oftentimes will see that show up like rolling the dice in your litters. Another thing that I like to look at a little closer is maybe our pedigree and genetics. So there is a lot of questions get thrown around for pedigree versus genetics on coefficients of inbreeding, right? Like Mimi mentioned before, it used to be a real common thing to do these close line breeding because we're trying to look for a consistent phenotype, which is that physical presentation. We didn't have genetics before to leverage to try to plan our breedings. So we had to use what we saw and what we knew. And so it was a lot easier to track that via a pedigree. Pedigree coefficients of inbreeding are really easy things to digest and to look at, where I can say, okay, I really like this dog. The more often he shows up in the pedigree, the more likely I am to like what I produce. That is a somewhat accurate statement. However, with genetics and what we've learned from genetics, that's not actually always the case. So bringing in genetic coefficient of inbreeding means that you are now looking at the dog's genetics, and out of either parent, what dog has the most amount of the genetics of the dog that you like, right? So it's as simple and as complicated as saying that I have a million different ways that those dogs can be mixed together, thrown in a bag and pulled out and see what you can get. And each one's going to be different than the other. Even twins, though are identical, are still have slightly different DNA. So we want to take not only and stack the phenotype, that physical characteristic of the things that we like in our favor, as line breeding. We also want to make sure that from a genetic perspective, that we are maintaining just enough of that diversity to maintain some health and the ability to continue breeding our dogs. And so there is too much inbreeding, but if you'd be surprised how many times that you actually look that your dog may not actually be as closely related to his grandsire as you once thought he was, right? Because genetics can prove you wrong. It's absolutely fascinating. I did a breeding where there was no common ancestry in over 5 generations. Like I hunted and hunted to find this dog, and that's before the diversity stuff was super popular. And come to find out, all of those puppies were as similar genetically as your average Doberman was, and they were literally like closer related to the sire, which had more of the inbreeding than the bitch did, right? And like, you would never have known these things. I would have gone that whole time going, wow, look at my diverse pedigree. I have no inbreeding, when realistically, the genetics tell you much different. And another circumstance is where I have two litter mates. One of them is really closely genetically to her grandsire, right? And like really close, like almost like an uncle versus a grandsire, just really close. Whereas the other sibling, the grandsire almost doesn't even show up from a genetic perspective. She did not inherit any of that. So breeding that dog to her grandsire to try to button down that phenotype is a very reasonable thing to do. So there's no one like right answer for this. You have to go into each one of these situations with just an open mind and try to stack the odds in your favor. Sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it won't, but use the tools we have out there. You use that pedigree to drive phenotype. You use the genetic testing to drive that genetic variation that helps us try to maintain the ability to continue line breeding, right? It's a tool to help each other out. Another thing that, you always want to look into is that compatibility. Oftentimes you're going to walk down pedigrees and you're going to find a stud that you absolutely love. And you're going to think, wow, that dog could really complement my female. And you get super excited about it. And then all of a sudden, it all looks great on paper. You might see a litter out of this dog and those puppies don't look anything like the dog. And you're like, huh, that's strange. I thought I would get some of this, right? But what ends up happening is, though that dog has a lot of great attributes, if you take that dog and you layer him on top of your female's qualities, they may not actually line up the way you think they would, because those genetics in that dog have a way of overriding or being suppressed by the female's genetics. And so you're not going to get a stud that's going to produce himself or stamp his get. You're going to get a lot more variability. So if you're looking at really trying to harden what you have, you need to start looking at the stud's compatibility with what you have and if they breed true or not. If you were to take those grandparents and you look at maybe his grandsire, and you put that against a bunch of other females that he's already bred to, and you look at what they've produced, you can start seeing some common themes usually, right? Or the complete lack of. You got to know these things when you walk into that breeding. Sometimes it's worth the risk. Sometimes you just love that pedigree. It has like phenomenal longevity. It's got all of these different things that are just going to, you're just so excited, and your female can bring enough of those attributes to the table that you're not worried about the phenotype. In other cases, though, you really need that, right? Like sometimes that you have enough variability that if you don't tighten it up, you can lose what you're striving for. So in those situations, now you need to pair with a dog who is historically, through his own breedings and maybe his grandsires and the pairings behind them, are actually continuing to produce those attributes that you need that are compatible with what you already have. So it's always this negotiation, right? You're never going to get it all. So you're going to have to pick and choose some of these variables that you're willing to take a risk on for the sake of what is more important to you. Some of these things are a lot of times what drives that variability within our own breed, why we have styles, right? Like you can even look at regional styles. You have dogs over in California who don't look anything like dogs on the East Coast, right? Some of that is because of what is available to them and the prepotency that's already there in those populations. And so most of those dogs probably go back to the same dogs anyways because of what's available to them. Every once in a while it doesn't, but it's interesting if you start looking at those populations and how different they actually become. Another couple different areas that we can focus on when you're considering a breeding match is going to be things like the age of the dog that you're breeding to, right? So sometimes we have a female, which most of us will breed our females when they're in their prime, right? That like 2 to 4 range is when most of us are breeding our females. Your female may or may not be, a maiden. She may not have had puppies before, and now you get a little nervous. So you're probably going to choose a dog that's that's already have a bit more experience. So age is one of those things where you go, okay, well, I know that if I pick a 6-year-old male, he's likely already have litters on the ground. He probably has puppies that are of old enough age where you can actually see what they look like now. He's now at an age where the majority of his life is in a good place where you can start looking at some health, right? So age is a consideration. Now, on the opposite coin, you might have an older female, this is her last litter, and you don't want to risk it on a 7-year-old with not so great swimmers, right? You want to get a good quality male that is young and prolific that you know is going to be able to get the job done. So there's all those different things. Then that final straw is there's actually some genetic influence. When your males are older, it actually modifies their genetic makeup, and it adds these certain type of modifiers to their genetics that say, hey, I am an older male, I'm prime, I've lived through all of this stuff, and it's actually a positive thing. And so it's actually worthwhile to breed to these slightly older males in that 6 to 7 category before age itself really starts, wearing them down genetically and from a health perspective. So age is actually a really fascinating category that I do take into consideration a lot of times with my breedings. I like to breed my females in that 3 to 4 age range. So I am still on the cusp of a healthy female, but at the same token, I want a male that I know has already produced, been out there, done the things, and I can track them down and, go down that rabbit hole of research. So it's a valuable tool to understand how it can play a role in your breeding program. That also piggybacks off of that breeding history. I've touched base on this on a couple times, where when you are looking for things that you really need to be cemented in your breeding program, you want to make sure that you're looking back behind your male or that dog that you're breeding with, that you see this constantly showing that male is producing puppies with the qualities, the attributes that you are striving for, and that they aren't producing those things that you really can't take the risk of in your pedigree or your breeding program. That history is so important. It's really easy for us sometimes to sit down and, we're at our dog show or at a performance venue, or, you're talking to folks, you see their pictures on Facebook or things like that, and you get caught up in the moment. And we love these dogs, and you start researching those dogs and you start to think, oh man, this could be really great. And then you start looking at their offspring or their siblings and their siblings' offspring, or that dog's sire and dam and what they've produced, and you start to realize that maybe they don't have the history of producing that thing that you really need. It doesn't mean they're not good, it doesn't mean they can't be great. They could be amazing, but they aren't amazing for your dog in your program. So doing that research, not only up and down your pedigrees, but also right to left, is just as important. And understanding what you have on your female or your program and what's behind them as well, is going to help you get insight into the trends that you can shape in your own program. So that's, really, really important to continue to look at. One of the other things that I wanted to bring up are a few common misconceptions. And it kind of, I think most of them truly are built off of the experiences that we've had in the past when we didn't have the tools available to us that we do now. There was a lot of situations where the only time you got to see the dogs that you wanted to breed to were going to be at these huge events where that dog is like your top 20 contender, right? We all go to the national, and that's like one of the few times you actually see these dogs in person. And so it's easy for us to jump on these top winning dogs. And then we make the assumption, right? Well, back in the day, you didn't have any other tools, but we make this assumption that by putting 2 top winning dogs together, you're going to create a top winning dog. It's not that it's not true, but it's also not always true, nor is it always accurate, right? There's so many more variables that go into breeding and genetics and building or diminishing trends, that you can have 2 beautiful examples of our breed that should never be put together, right? Because it's just, they're not compatible. They're not going to enhance the things that we need to have enhanced as our breed, in our breed as a whole. And they may even actually double up on things that we don't want. It also, you know, you got to look past the skin. We got to look into overall structure, that dog's, you know, how their brains work in their own environments. You know, is that health there? You know, shoot, teeth, right? The things we never get to see. We always need to make sure that we're confirming all of these different factors and making sure that we're putting dogs together that have a higher chance of being successful in all categories, not just one. I think that's about all I have. I know that we're getting close to time anyways for you guys, so I guess we could just open it up to Q&A, because I know we're like 2 after my 30-minute slot. So any questions, comments, concerns for me?
What do you think about some of these dogs that have been bred 50, 60 times? You know, what that contributes to the breed?
Ridiculous.
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. And I think there's a lot of different ways to answer that. Our knee-jerk response, right, is to say, don't do it. Because now you're saturating, right? Now you have one dog that's showing up numerous times in so many pedigrees, and say you have it, maybe you've line bred and you've had that dog behind a lot of the stuff that you already have, and now you need to fix a fault that's in that dog, and you can't get away from it. Everything that's out there has the same dog with the same faults that you need to breed away from. I also know, though, that genetics don't always work like your pedigree shows. So just because the dog's been used doesn't mean his genetics are as prolific as we may think they are. And so I think that there's always a balancing act, and you also have to be able to use what you can get your hands on. Breeding is not always so easy as to say, hey, I really like that dog, and the owner is like, sure, let's do it, right? There's a lot of reasons why some dogs are used more than others, and it's not always the reasons we think. And so yeah, it's suggested with a breed that's already bottlenecked like ours to probably avoid common sire syndrome. And it's not an easy problem to solve, though, at all. It's very difficult when a lot of people have these amazing dogs in their backyard and nobody ever sees them, and we don't hear about them. It's also hard to get a hold of. There's people out there with frozen semen on dogs that haven't been used a whole lot, just waiting for someone to knock on their door, but nobody knows they exist, right? And we don't have a lot of substantial information on these dogs because it was done, you know, maybe before the time of social media. And so there's a lot of ways to fight that, but it's going to continue happening without, I think, the right amount of education, tools, and availability. We gatekeep. We're all accused of it. I mean, I'm guilty. I know, you know, we all try to protect what we have. But it's not going to help anyone. So
Sit down.
I hope that answered your question in a appropriate way.
What about breeding like out of the country, you know,
I have a
Europe or
question.
Brazil or wherever?
Question.
I came from Cocker Spaniels. And there was one dog in the Cocker Spaniels that was very prepotent.
Mm-hmm.
He himself was not a champion, but produced over 100 champions.
Great question.
Yeah.
Look, I'm currently looking for a male, but I want to see the progeny of that male from different bitches.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for consistency.
Yeah. So I heard the other countries question too, so I'll try to hit both of those quickly here. So one of our hurdles with our breed and in the world that we're in right now when it comes to animal rights and backyard breeders, you know, all these different facets of people breeding dogs and trying to produce dogs, we have tried so hard to show responsible breeding that we've almost put ourselves in a corner, because now if you use something that's not titled, if you use something that doesn't have a pedigree full of champions, you almost get blacklisted, or automatically it's assumed they don't have good worth. Now, those of us that can look past that know that that's not always the case, right? We have dogs out there that for some reason or another doesn't hit the show ring or doesn't ever do that performance stuff, right? And you got to know what you have and what you're looking for, and we have to be willing to have those conversations and not just close the door. There are dogs out there that are going to have genetics that'll probably blow our minds, but we'll never know because they're never used, because maybe they didn't get that championship, maybe they didn't finish their ROM. And I think as breeders, we need to keep an open mind. It doesn't mean that we don't strive for it, but I think we need to look past the paper. I think we really need to, if you see a dog you like, if you're talking to someone about a dog that sounds interesting, ask, inquire, be curious, learn. I mean, I do, you guys know, I'm into the working dog stuff as much as I love conformation. I mean, I've bred champions at this point and IGP dogs. I love it all. But I'm out there around some of these dogs, these American bred show line that have qualities in them that I would love to be able to incorporate into a working dog pedigree, right? But if you don't ask and you don't look and you don't open your mind to the possibility, you don't have to pursue it. You don't have to actually do it, but just be open to it. You might be surprised what you can find, right? As far as the importing dogs from other countries, using studs, importing semen, things like that, you know, nowadays it's so much easier to do these things. It's also so much easier to see dogs. We can watch videos of them. We're you know, pictures I'm always in about. You never know sometimes with pictures nowadays. But you can build relationships with people in other countries. You can dive into their breeding programs. You can research what they've already been producing, what they're doing. And I think that if you continue to approach all of these dogs in the same way, which means, what do I need for my program? Break it down, right? Get rid of the country of origin. Get rid of what that dog does for a living. Look specifically for the attributes you need. If you find that across the way, if you have to jump an ocean to find it, do it. If it makes sense to you, if you think that dog is truly bringing value to what you need, do it. There's absolutely no reason not to, right? We have testing out there. We can even do genetic testing. So like we can go out and say, okay, maybe there is no real benefit to going overseas. If I can find that here, you know, then I can use it. And they're not really that, you know, you got the diversity scores are up there. They got all the health testing, like be responsible about it. But if you can, why not? If it makes sense for you, do it. You shouldn't be bound by country of origin. You shouldn't. You will be surprised how many dogs sitting out there in Europe, you know, that we would inherently be like, oh my gosh, no, they're hideous. But the dogs are out there. You just only see the ones that people want you to see. So I don't think that we should ever dismiss dogs from other countries. I think that there is value in all of those genetic populations. You just have to hunt for it. You got to work for it, but it's out there and you shouldn't hesitate to use it.
Thanks, Randy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I
Okay.
appreciate you having me. I'm always, like I said, open to any questions or feedback. You know, I have more reference material if anyone's interested in that. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your evening. It's great seeing you all. Nice to see you, Mimi.
Hey,
Hi, Jay.
hey, I have a comment.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Link or
Okay, so there are a few breeders.
Can you hold on a second, please? Thank you.
I'm sorry, what?
Andy, is there a link or an email or someplace?
An email. One.
Well, if people want to be able to reach out to her, what is the best way to reach her?
You can email is fine. You can find me on Facebook. Like in any of them, they're all on my phone. So I can send my email. It should have been in your guys' meeting invite. But feel free to reach out via, you know, any means that you have my contact on, and I can send out more, you know, I can send out my actual consulting and training email too, if you guys wanted to, go that route. But if you can't find anything, you can always reach out to, folks in the group there and go from there, or just email me. It's fine.
Want to make sure we can get a hold of you.
Hey,
Yes.
that puppy of yours is cuter than a button.
Yeah.
Thank you. She's pretty special.
Yeah.